Welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson. Thanks for joining us. Our topic today is managing grief based on the grieving person's age. My guest is Christian author Clarissa Mull, author of the book Hurt, Help, Hope, which is geared towards teenagers predominantly. Clarissa, great to see you. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Lori.
So first of all, let me, on behalf of myself and our viewers, express our condolences for the death of your husband, who died in 2019 from a hiking accident. And you actually worked with your teenage daughter on this book, right?
I did, yes. When my husband Rob died, he left me a young widow with four children to raise on my own. And I have raised them through almost every developmental stage now, through elementary school and junior high, high school, and into college. And my 19-year-old daughter, Fiona, and I paired together to create this resource for teenagers, a resource that we hope will be a good companion for them as they walk through loss for the first time themselves.
And also, in addition to the book, isn't there a 40-day devotional that sort of pairs with it?
Yes, we've got a 40-day devotional that offers meditations on loss and rebuilding, resilience, and resurrection. We also have a workbook for children, a picture book that's coming out in May, and we have an adult resource, Beyond the Darkness, as well. So really trying to create bereavement resources for every stage of the journey, for every person in a family when someone loses a loved one.
Your first book after the untimely death of your husband is called Beyond the Darkness. That's geared mostly towards adults. Your most recent book called Hurt, Help, Hope, geared towards teenagers, that has a devotional that's out now. And then this coming spring in May, a children's book on grief, Hope Comes to Stay. So why did you decide to do all these different types of books for different ages in grief?
Well, pretty quickly, as a grieving mom who was raising grieving children, I realized that we weren't experiencing our loss the same. Even though we had lost the same loved one, we were all experiencing it from our own seats on the bus. I was the leader, the new parent, the solo parent. I was the decision maker for the family, and I was the only adult. And I began to see that my adult experience of loss was very different from my children's. But even then, their experience of loss was different as I considered their ages. My youngest had just turned 7 when my husband died, and my oldest was turning 14. And the difference between a little girl's understanding of loss and an emerging teenager's experience of loss, even these were very different. And what we realized as we journeyed over the last 5 years together was that each age group really needed its own tailor made resources that would accompany them through the hardest parts of the beginning of their loss and help them to see the possibilities for flourishing in the years ahead.
Regardless of the age of the grieving person, it's different also when the person they lose is young, and also when the death is sudden and very unexpected, as your husband's were. Can you give us a little bit of background about, and I know this is probably painful for you to talk about, but just to help us understand where you and your family are coming from, what happened to your husband in the hiking accident?
Sure. Yeah. We were in the middle of our family vacation. We were 3,000 miles away from home when two police chaplains arrived at my campsite to let me know that my husband had fallen to his death in a hiking accident in the backcountry of a national park. And, this is not what you expect on your family vacation. It's certainly not something you plan space for in the itinerary. And yet we were plunged into a loss that was going to change the rest of our lives. And, while that loss experience is unique to us, there are so many universal qualities to grief that run across our experiences. Whether your person was sick for a long time and you saw death coming, or whether death arrived as a surprise, as it did for us, many of the same feelings come afterwards: a sense of shock, a sense of disbelief, Anger, frustration, disappointment, sadness, regret, all of these things are universal to the experience of grief. And that's why we have resources that we can rely on whatever way we come to the loss of our person. And it's something that is a comfort because grief can make you feel very alone. And so the feelings of isolation that we feel that are a natural result of our loss, we can bridge those divides, bridge those gaps, and find support when we acknowledge some of those universal qualities that all of us experience when we grieve.
So, your book, Hurt, Help, Hope, which is geared towards teenagers, is really the first book in 20 years or so that dealt with teen grief. How many teens are we talking about who deal with grief?
Well, right here in the US, 1 in 12 in some states and 1 in 14 is our national average will lose a parent or sibling before they turn 18. We know that 300,000 students will experience a death right in their school because of a school shooting before they hit graduation. And that doesn't even account for all the losses that many students have experienced over the last 4 years because of the COVID pandemic. And so we know that when you enter a school classroom, a youth group, when you sit on a school bus, you are sitting among many children who are experiencing some kind of loss of a loved one. And even divorce, job changes, job loss, moves, all of those things count as loss because they intersect with a child's developmental growth in those years when they are very tender, when they're looking for stability, when loss means an indelible mark on their lives as they grow and change.
What are some of the most common struggles, specifically for teenagers who are dealing with grief?
I think for many teenagers, there is a desire to be normal. Even if you haven't lost a loved one, when you're a teenager, you just want to fit in. You want to be like everybody else. And so the struggles that come along with grief, disruptions in sleep, disruptions in eating patterns, changes in relationships, all of those things heighten the sense that a teenager is different. And so when we're coming alongside of a teenager, we want to normalize grief. We want to normalize that this is something that everyone experiences and there are commonalities there. And so when we walk with a student over the years, it is that gift of presence for the long haul that makes such a difference. Saying, hey, you know what? This is a normal part of being human. This is a normal part of life. And I'm going to stick around and walk with you as long as it takes until you feel like you've got your feet under you.
A lot of teenagers are really good at not expressing their true emotions. And we sometimes get very concerned about kids. We know stuff is going on in their lives, yet they don't show it. What are some of the risks teens facing grief are liable for?
Well, I think parents and caregivers often go to the scariest things. They think about acting out sexually or drug use or suicidal ideation. And those things certainly are concerns and never want to downplay those kinds of concerns. But the average warp and woof concerns for most students are isolation from relationships that are life giving, and isolation from activities that are life giving, problems with concentration that affect their performance in school or sports or the other things that they used to enjoy. And for those students who find it difficult to talk about their loss with a parent or a close friend, I always encourage those students find one trusted adult. It's hard for students to connect with their parents in adolescence. We know this. Research tells us this, but research also tells us that children who experience an adverse childhood experience, a death, a loss, a divorce, they just need one committed adult to make the difference in their life. And so, if your child's not talking to you, make sure that they have a village of people who are options to talk to: coaches, teachers, youth leaders, an aunt or an uncle who can be available to them. Because communication can start small and it doesn't always start in the places we expect.
All right, this is great information. We're going to take a quick break and be right back with Clarissa Mall. The book is called Hurt, Help, Hope. Stay with us. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We are talking about how to help a teenager who is grieving. We're speaking with Clarissa Mall, Christian author of the book Hurt, Help, Hope. And Clarissa, before the break, we were talking about having a trusted adult, how kids need at least just one person they can talk to. What can parents specifically do to help a teenager who's grieving?
I think the first thing that parents can do is to take a posture of humility. You know, as parents, we like to think that we have all the answers, that we're the guide, we're the oldest person in the house, we're the adult in the room. But grief is a very unique experience. It kind of puts people on the same level. And so, encouraging parents to become a student of their child, to be inquisitive listeners, to ask curious questions, to sit and be patient, to sit at the feet of their child and say, hey, you know, I don't know what it's like to be a teenager who has lost a loved one. Will you tell me what it's like so that I can learn from you? I think that posture of humility generally goes a long way with students. It reminds them that they actually do know themselves best and that they can be a guide in this experience. It gives them a sense of agency in a time where they can feel very lost and anchorless. And they know that they have a parent who will be responsive to them. And, you know, we know as parents that we can't fix all of the hard things that happen to our children. And the amazing thing is, our teenagers know that too. And so that posture of humility helps us to be authentic and transparent, and actually is the foundational kind of building block work that we want to do in relationship development with our student, regardless of whether loss has darkened their path.
What do you do if the teenager doesn't seem to want to talk, doesn't seem to be very open? I'm thinking of teenage boys. I'm thinking of a teenage boy I know who lost his mother suddenly, and sometimes boys they don't bite when you try to throw them a lifeline. What can you do?
It's really interesting that you say that and notice boys, because I think a lot of that is enculturated. You know, we expect girls to be expressive and we teach boys, you know, big boys don't cry. We fall down and we rub some dirt in it and we get back in the game. And so I think the first thing for especially young men is to create an environment of acceptance, that in our house those cultural mores, those cultural rules, they don't apply. Here, we're just human and we can be our full selves. The second thing is to remember that not all students are what we might call expressive grievers. They are more instrumental grievers. They want to write or to play an instrument. They get their emotions out on the basketball court. And those are all valid expressions of grief, too. Even if your student doesn't talk about their loss very much, they may be enacting the grief process every time they get out onto the soccer field or every time they pick up that electric guitar and practice for an hour upstairs in their bedroom.
Is it a good idea to bring up the deceased person when that person is not the topic of conversation? Is it helpful or hurtful to talk about the person who's gone on?
I hear that question a lot from a lot of people who are trying to be supportive. They say, I don't want to mention his name because I don't want you to hurt anymore. And the crazy thing is, it seems almost counterintuitive, but actually saying the deceased person's name actually makes it hurt less because it's acknowledging the loss that exists in the everyday, in the every moment for the grieving person. In our family, we talk about my husband, Rob, a lot. We talk about the things we loved about him. We talk about his foibles, about the mistakes he made, because it's important for my kids to know that he was a full human, that he wasn't a mythic Superman kind of creature in our lives, but he was someone who was flesh and blood, who we loved very much, and who we still love. And by mentioning that deceased person's name, we carry that person into the lives we live without them. It's an important part of the grieving process for adults and for teens as well.
We're all thinking about the person, and it does sort of keep them alive. They're in our hearts all the time anyway. It keeps their memory
Mhm.
alive. All right, we're going to take another break and be right back with Clarissa Mall, Christian author of a number of books on grief, including Hurt, Help, Hope, which is geared towards teenagers. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We are talking with Clarissa Mall, author of the book Hurt, Help, Hope, which is geared towards helping teenagers grieve the loss of a loved one. So, Clarissa, how long does it take for the grief process on average for like a teenager? In other words, you wonder if they're ever over it.
Mm. Well, we're never over it because grief is a lifelong companionship. It arrives like an unbidden visitor at our front door, sets down its bags, unpacks, and moves right in. And you will grieve the death of your person for the rest of your life because love lasts for a lifetime. And yet, grief changes shape over time, and particularly for teenagers. We know that students grieve and they re grieve at every developmental milestone. So they may experience their loss in a very acute phase immediately after the death, and then things seem to level out a little bit. But then prom comes along or graduation comes along, any of these milestones that are significant for a student, and they feel a resurgence of that grief over again, which is why we never want to use the words healed or recovered when we're talking about grief, because it can give students a false sense that they will be over this at some point. And so when they feel that surge of big grief feelings again at another developmental milestone, they're not sure what to do. They think maybe they've done something wrong, like they're backsliding or they've made a mistake. But this is all the natural rhythm of what it means to grieve and grow as you're moving into adulthood. We want to normalize that for students.
So many people, adults, and I'm guessing teens and children, feel that healing or moving on with their lives, being happy, is sometimes a betrayal of that other person, as if being happy doesn't mean you're not still hurting from losing them, and that would make their death seem in the mind of the griever less important or less significant. Can you address that idea of moving on? It sometimes feels like a betrayal.
I think this is where our faith becomes particularly relevant because we know that we live in the now and the not yet, in the fulfillment of God's promises. And yet also, we're still waiting for that ultimate consummation of God's good plans for us. And so we teach our students that this is what life is like, that it is about carrying joy and sorrow in the same hand, that we can sing with joy with a lump in our throats. We can cry and still go out and enjoy friends. It is the richness of a life lived in the promises of God. And, it's something that our culture doesn't like to encourage. We like to think of black and white thinking, but a growth mindset for students reminds them that the difficulties that they face are all part of the building and the growing process for them. And they can cultivate resilience as they acknowledge that pain and as they move forward with that pain and build something beautiful through it.
I want to talk about your children's book, Hope Comes to Stay. Can you briefly discuss how a child grieves differently and ways that we can meet a child in their time of need that's different from, for example, teenagers or adults?
Well, teenagers have one foot in adulthood and they have one foot in their childhood. And so they are sort of the unicorns of the bereavement community. It's hard to know sometimes how your teenager is going to behave. Will they behave like more like an adult one day, or will they behave more like a toddler one day? The great thing about children is that they tend to act the same way all the time, which is to say, they're concrete thinkers. They ask questions like, can grandma breathe underground? What does it mean to be cremated? All of those questions that seem so stark to us as adults, but they're very concrete questions because a child is trying to understand the concrete world. They don't understand abstractions until they're much older. And so those conversations with a child are really about rudimentary developmental language about death, about dying, about grief. And this is where nature is so instrumental and helpful. We see trees with new green leaves every spring. We see those same leaves die every fall and turn into dust. We see animals, pets who grow old and feeble and die. And we can talk to our children using these as object lessons, really, to help them understand the rudimentary parts of death and dying and grief. And then we can expect that kids have short attention spans. And so they may have a brief conversation about death or grief or loss with us, and then run outside to play with a friend or go and play Legos or Barbies And this is also very normal. Our children have growing brains. They can't take in all of the complexities of grief and loss, and this really is a mercy for them. They are not designed to carry adult sorrows, and so we are so happy, so grateful when they can pop up from a seemingly serious conversation and move on to a place of joy. And this is what it means to grieve as a young child, and we'll see that change as they developmentally emerge into adolescence. But it is a part of the learning process for them to learn how to carry their grief into every place that they will go, from the playground to the backyard to the school classroom.
Oh, well, we can't wait for that book to come out in May. Hope Comes to Stay, geared towards children who are grieving. All right, we're going to take one final break and be right back with Clarissa Mall. The book is called Hurt, Help, Hope. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We are talking with Clarissa Mall, a grief specialist. And unfortunately, we've only scratched the surface, Clarissa, and there's so much more to talk about. You have so many more resources, too, for our viewers. Tell folks how they can find out more about you, where they can get your books and so forth.
Well, you can visit me at clarissamall.com. It's where you can find all the information about my books: Beyond the Darkness, a gentle guide for living with grief and thriving after loss; Hurt, Help, Hope, a real conversation about teen grief and life after loss; the devotional that I have available to walk you through 40 days of grieving and hope; and then Hope Comes to Stay, this picture book that will be a gentle introduction for young children to the process of grieving and living again after loss. I love to connect with listeners over at my podcast, The Bulletin. It's the flagship news podcast for Christianity Today. I host that and produce that show. And I love to connect with readers and listeners on Instagram, where I hang out on social media.
Well, you are a tremendous resource and an incredible blessing to so many people. Thank you, Clarissa, for being with us today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And thanks to you, viewers, for tuning into this edition of Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson, and we'll see you again next week.